They decided who you were before you could talk. Somewhere, before your first memory, a family sat down and cast you in a role. Nobody voted, nobody told you. You just grew up inside it, the way you grow up inside a language. And here's the part I need you to hold on to until the very end, because the end of this story is not what you think. The day you finally leave that family, the role doesn't retire. It gets recast. And who they gave it to, after everything, is the cruelest thing I've ever watched a family do to itself. We'll get there. Start at the beginning. Stage 1, the assignment. You're 4, maybe 5. A glass breaks in the kitchen. 2 children standing there. One gets asked, "Are you okay?" The other gets asked, "What did you do?" Same kitchen, same glass, different questions. That was the whole system in one afternoon. You just didn't have the words yet. And put down the first lie right now. You were not picked because you were bad. The pattern is almost boring in how consistent it runs. Families like this pick the child who feels too loudly, the one who says the true thing at the table, the one who reminds somebody of everything they can't stand in themselves. You weren't chosen for being broken. You were chosen for being awake. Stage 2, the ledger. Somewhere in that house is a ledger nobody can see. Your sister's mistakes evaporate. Dropped, forgiven, rewritten. She's under a lot of pressure, you know how she is. Yours get filed, dated, brought out at dinners years later, like evidence. The dent in the car, the grade, the tone you took in 2009. We just worry about you. Worry. That's what they named the file. Because a family like this has one problem it refuses to look at. So the blame has to live somewhere. It can't float free. Someone has to hold it. You weren't raised in that house. You were storage. Stage 3, the label. The teen years are when they name you. Too sensitive, dramatic, difficult. And watch the trick closely, because it's the engine of your whole childhood. Every time you point at the fire, you get blamed for the smoke. You cry at what they said, and the crying becomes the incident. The label works because it's a lens. Once you're the difficult one, everything you do is evidence. And nothing they do is. Your sister got a label too. Perfect, gifted, easy. Hold that thought. Her label is a cage too. She just can't see the bars from inside it. You'll want to remember that when we reach the end. Stage 4, the promise. 17, flat on your bed, staring at the ceiling. And you make yourself one quiet promise. The day I can leave, I leave. You count the months like a prisoner counts days. You believe, you truly believe, that distance is the cure. That the role lives in that house, and the highway out of town is the exit. That's Act 1 of your life. Here's what nobody warns the scapegoat about Act 2. You can leave the house. The house doesn't leave you. The first morning in your own apartment, you wake up and nobody is disappointed in you yet. That's silence. You could live inside that silence. Stage 5, the escape. First place, bad heating, thin walls, and relief, like setting down a backpack you'd carried so long you thought it was your spine. But then you start noticing the strange things. Your boss shifts in a meeting and your stomach drops, for no reason you can name. You apologize to a chair you bump into, to a landlord, to a friend, for having a feeling. You walk into every room and scan it, automatically, the way a soldier checks the exits. Nobody trained you to do that, except somebody did. The role was never only in the house. It's in the nervous system, the flinch, the audit, the shrinking you do before anyone asks. You did the leaving. The wiring came with you. Stage 6, the visits. Then there are the holidays. You drive home a whole person. Somewhere on that highway, you shrink. By the time your hand is on their door, you're 14 again. One dinner, and the casting resumes like you never left the show. The jokes at your expense. Your news, eaten mid-sentence by your sister's news. The old stories where you're always the punchline. Remember how she was? And notice the phone. 11 months of silence, and then it rings, warm as anything, the week they need something. The role has hours, you just work them remotely now. Stage 7, the good news. The promotion comes, or the engagement, the finished degree, whatever your version was. And you call them first. You always call them first. Hope has a long memory. Now listen to what happens to your news inside that call. It shrinks. That's nice. And then 20 minutes about your sister's kitchen renovation. At your own wedding, someone gives a toast and finds a way to make it about how far you've come. From what? They let hang in the air. Because good news, in a family like this, is a problem. The story only holds if you're the broken one. Every time you're visibly fine, somebody has to quietly fix the story. Stage 8, the phone call. And then, in the year you're strongest, the hook arrives. Your aunt first, then your sister, then her. Mom's not doing well. She misses you. She's been asking for you. A softness you haven't heard in years. Old photos surfacing online. An invitation that reads like an apology, without ever containing one. And here is where you wobble. Everyone wobbles here. You start the audit. Maybe I remembered it worse than it was. Maybe I was difficult. Maybe if I'd been softer. Stop there. Look at the direction of that question. You went straight to, what am I doing wrong? And skip the question that comes first. What was done to me? I'll tell you why I know that skip so well. Years ago, I sat at a table like yours. Not my family. I was a guest. And I watched a father take his daughter apart over one dinner, piece by piece, politely, and I passed the salt. That's my confession. I saw it clearly, from the outside, in a single evening, and I said nothing. Because the room was so calm about it that I doubted my own eyes. One dinner did that to me. A grown man with no history in that house. You had 18 years of dinners. So no, you weren't weak for wobbling. The room is built to be doubted in. So you go back. One more try. Because that's who you are. That was always who you were. Stage 9. The dinner. It happens at the table. It usually does. Someone rewrites history right in front of you. One time too many. And you say one sentence. Calm. Factual. True. That's not what happened. That's it. That's the entire crime. Watch the room. Forks down. The temperature drops. Your mother's face does the thing. Your father studies his plate like scripture. And your sister, the golden one, picks a side in 1 second flat. Hers. A family like this can survive anything except the true sentence said out loud. You didn't start a war at that table. You just stopped pretending there wasn't one. Stage 10. The verdict. After that dinner, a version of you starts traveling without you. Ungrateful. Unstable. We don't know what happened to her. Cousins go quiet. An uncle you loved sends a paragraph about family and forgiveness, addressed somehow only to you. The ones who saw everything say nothing. The ones who saw nothing say the most. And so the machine finishes its work. It makes you the villain of the story about your own wounds. Hear this part plainly, because it's the part they took from you. You're not crazy. You're outnumbered. Those are different things. Stage 11. The quiet. So you stop explaining. No speech at the door. No dramatic exit. You just stop showing up for a role. The calls space out. The guilt arrives in waves, and you let the waves pass through the apartment without answering them. And slowly, slower than anyone promises, your shoulders come down. You cook for one, and it feels like a ceremony. You bump a chair, and don't apologize to it. You think the story's over. You think you were the last chapter. You weren't. Because the family you left still has one problem it refuses to look at. And now, an empty chair. Stage 12. The replacement. It reaches you sideways, months later. A cousin's message. Word travels. Your sister, the perfect one, the gifted one, the easy one, is going through something. She's changed, apparently. Difficult lately. Sensitive. We just worry about her. You know those words. You wore those words. Because the machine needed a part. That's the coldest sentence in this whole story. So I'll say it plainly. The role was never about you. It was a job opening. You were just born standing closest to it. And here's the ending nobody warns either sister about. You, the blamed one, you're out. The blamed child is the one who questions the family. That's the strange gift buried under all those years. The adored child almost never does. She can't. The love is the leash. She spent 30 years being paid in applause for staying exactly where she stood. And the moment your chair went empty, the same machine that crowned her began to feed on her. Then one night, your phone lights up. Her name. First time in a year. Her voice is small. Smaller than you've ever heard it. You don't know what it's like now. But you do. You know exactly what it's like. And notice what you feel. Not victory. You checked. Some part of you went looking for the gloat, and it isn't there. Just distance. Like reading about a storm in a country you moved away from. You tell her your door is open. To her, the person. Not to the role. Not to the family she's still carrying in her mouth. Then you set the phone face down and go back to the stove. One warm light on, in your kitchen. The first house you've ever lived in where nobody assigned you anything. You were never the problem. You were the proof there was one.